Marvel Vision, a podcast about Marvel, the MCU, and right now we're going to be talking about Thor. I'm Alex.
I'm Justin.
I'm Pete.
And we have a special guest for you this episode. Very excited to have you here. Alisha Grauso. She is the features editor of Screenrant. Alisha, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. And
Welcome.
you got my name right.
Yay, I did it.
Hey.
I promised to screw it up when we were off camera, and then
did.
I didn't. So I'm sorry. I lied right here at the top. Like Loki.
Classic.
There you go. It's
Yeah,
like a
you're
Loki.
the liar. You're the Loki
Good
of this
save.
podcast.
Good save. Nice segue.
So just some ground information that everybody probably knows about Thor. We've been making our way through the MCU Phase 1 and the gap between Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Order.
What? No particular. Pete has this thing where we should have started with Blade, and it's
Yep.
become a little bit of
Yes.
contention, but he's wrong.
Nope.
That's a lot of movies.
Yeah. I feel like
Well,
when
are
we
we
talk...
doing this or are we not? You know what I mean?
I
Don't say
mean-
we're going to do it, then do some movies. Like, let's do it.
I mean, that even goes back to like the very first Fantastic Four movie. What was
Mhm.
it? 90? Was it 94?
The Roger Corman one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah,
it
we got to
90
start
something?
there,
Yeah.
I think.
we
Okay, we'll go back there.
certainly
So
must.
we're talking about Roger Corman's
Dolph
Fantastic
Lundgren.
Four this episode.
Perfect
we're
movie.
going to talk about Thor. This is the fourth movie in the MCU as we make our way to Loki, which is debuting on June 9th. Thor came out May 6th, 2011. Last time we were talking about Iron Man 2, the original plan was for Thor to come out pretty much immediately after that, but due to a lot of different reasons, they had to push it to about a year later, right before Captain America, the First Avenger. But it's directed by Kenneth Branagh, written by Ashley Edward Miller, Zach Stentz, and Don Payne. And before we get too far into it in terms of talking about casting or impressions or anything, Alisha, I'm curious, what was your impression when you first watched Thor back in the day?
You know, the funny thing is, I didn't actually love the first Thor movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think the strongest part of it by far is Tom Hiddleston, but I think most people would think that of the first two Thor movies. It felt like they didn't fully have a handle on like how to make the character of Thor fun. So, and I also sometimes get a little annoyed at fish out of water stories, and this is just a personal thing where the person is clearly in a different world, but they don't even take like 30 seconds to look around and be like, hey, how do people act in this world? Maybe I should do that. Like, so not Thor. Like, has anybody else smashed like a cup on the floor? No, I should definitely do that. So at first I liked it. I had a lot of fun with it, but it wasn't like my favorite Marvel movie. But I've learned to appreciate it more over the years as I've watched it again and as it's fit into the larger context of the MCU.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, I've talked about this a lot on the different podcasts we've done. This is my favorite Marvel movie, I think.
Still? Still?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, we can definitely get into it, but
Holy shit, we have to talk about that.
This is going to be fun.
Is this a thing? Do we need an
What?
intervention? Is this like a
maybe.
whole...
I think so. I think part of the reason is that I love the character of Thor, so I was already kind of sold on it. But here's the big thing, and Justin and Pete, I'm curious to get your take after this. But the
Good,
thing
you're
that I was
gonna
really
get it.
the thing that I was really struck by
comment.
this time through for this rewatch, the way that we're looking at it now over a decade later, is this felt like the one they got the formula down. You know, you had Iron Man was this bold experiment. They're throwing it out there. They're trying so many different things. Then Incredible Hulk, like we talked about, was very much a throwback to the X-Men and Spider-Man era, which felt kind of before that, before this quantum leap that Iron Man was. Iron Man 2, doing too many things, trying too many things at the same time. But Thor, the thing that I've always really liked about this movie is it's just this nice, concise, simple story. And they...
Which definitely sounds like Marvel.
Yeah.
Really the Marvel formula.
All right, maybe that's incorrect, but I do think like at the same time they sort of hit the right balance of big action, of taking you into a new world, getting these really fun characters together,
Dutch
having some humor
angles.
in there. What?
Dutch angles. all
Dutch
over.
angles.
Filmmaker
Everybody loves a
over
little
here.
canting,
Come
yeah.
on. Just
So anyway, that's my broad overview. I know that I'm going to be in the minority here, but
Some-
I'm very well aware. I was emotionally preparing myself to talk about this movie because
Well,
I
I
have
mean,
no
you're-
filter.
I sort of hear you a little bit. I mean, I do think there's just a lot of what I think you're talking about, hitting the stride, getting the formula, is so muted in this movie. Like the humor the jokes are there in this movie, but they're just not super heightened. They're like just on medium speed, and not until Ragnarok do they really like, oh, that's what this is. Crank it all the way up. Because I think Iron Man is still the formula, and it gets a little. This to me is the most self-serious, except for Dark World, of the Marvel movies, and I think that's where it's out of balance a little bit.
And you're talking about serious because they wear serious wigs that really look real, and then Thor's eye color changes throughout the movie because that's serious as well. That's what you're talking about.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
Devil details.
Are you sure
there.
there's just not things reflecting on his eyes?
He's got blue eyes for most of it, and then there's a bunch of scenes where it's clearly black eyes. So I don't know if the contacts were bothering him or what happened.
Black eyes?
Yeah, he had just like So I thought it was a little like rewatching it. I was a little like a lot of like moments.
Did you have a nightmare during this
Is
movie?
Chris Hemsworth part demon, like a supernatural demon? Like I don't.
I think that's wrong, Pete. I mean, I appreciate you saying it, but I think that's
it might be true.
Show us the conspiracy board.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bet you're wrong then.
Yeah,
it always
probably.
felt a little bit like
but it seemed like it.
I felt like they were trying to, like with Thor, it always felt to me like they were trying to be a little like direct from the comics. And it's not really the sort of thing he's not really a character and that's not really a world you can adapt directly from the comics, at least not like early on in the MCU, because even with Spider-Man and, the X-Men movies and Blade, it kind of really feels like it wasn't until the MCU that comic book movies really became kind of ubiquitous and people could jump on board and be like, oh yeah, we know the general beats of comic book movies, like we're on board with weird stuff and goofy and cheesy and campy. And so the first Thor always felt like Loki and Tom Hiddleston existed in a Shakespearean tragedy, and then Thor existed in a fish out of water comedy. So I guess that's one of the reasons why it never felt like it gelled for me. And then until Taika Waititi came along like two movies later and was like, we don't care about the Shakespearean tragedy stuff. We're just going to go full comedy because, yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Kenneth Branagh was pretty straight up. And I think you're saying that he wasn't necessarily successful there, but he talked about before the movie, he was saying, yeah, we do have these two very different tones. We have what's going on in Asgard and then we have what's going on in Earth. If we can make it work, that's great. But
I would say
you're of the opinion
tones.
it doesn't.
Because of the frost giant world is also like very distinctly so I would say
Chill.
Sure, like that's a colder tone, and then Muspelheim, which they flash by briefly, is like a hotter tone,
a hotter place, from a design world. I also think like the formula they were getting right, or sort of getting to what they wanted to become, is moving very quickly through plot and characters. Like we don't get. I was surprised on the rewatching this how little of Jane Foster we get. Yeah. Like she's sort of not in the movie much, and it's like, oh, they're in love. Oh, they can't see each other anymore.
Well, when you hit a guy with your van, I mean, that's a classic meet cute.
And he looks like Chris Hemsworth, although I didn't really, he doesn't really do it for me, gotta say.
Really? Because I gotta say,
Ghostbusters, Chris Hemsworth.
Oh, yeah.
Thor Ragnarok, Chris Hemsworth.
Not
the personality, not at all. But the glasses, good look for him.
Oh my god, this is way far afield, but it makes me consistently so mad that he improvised most of the stuff in Ghostbusters and is so funny at it, and also so handsome at the same time. Choose a lane, buddy.
Wow. Has it all. He truly has it all.
Dude,
I'm so glad that they finally let him lean into the comedy, because it does feel like by the time Ragnarok came around that Marvel also didn't take itself as seriously. And so with this one, they were like, we have to get this right. It's we're using our like B team here because all the other studios have all our A team. They have Spider-Man, they have the X-Men, they have the Fantastic Four, they have everybody else. So we're stuck with Iron Man, Captain America in a post 9/11 world, Thor. So, I mean,
they made it work.
Yeah, and they did. They made it work. So like, yeah.
I also think it's interesting because the comic they're basing this on, the J. Michael Straczynski run, right?
Yeah, it was J. Michael Straczynski and Olivia Coipel. Is that how you pronounce his last name? I think.
Sure.
Wait, I wrote down the date somewhere. It was September 2007. They rebooted Thor. So,
and I think that era of Thor hasn't really aged well. It hasn't been like, that was something important. So I do think this movie stands out now as like, why was it in New Mexico so much? Like, it's very strange that the Bifrost is like, if something gets lost in Asgard, it goes straight to New Mexico, the coldest, most Nordic place on Earth.
Well, and just to give a little backstory there for anybody who doesn't know the comics, the whole idea of that was that Thor and the Norse gods set up shop in this small town of Broxton. And this gets back to what we were talking a little bit about with Incredible Hulk, where that pulled on it was Bruce Jones' storyline, right? With the Mr. Blue stuff, where I still think it's a very interesting thing. I mean, I think you're right that run is not as lauded now as it was back when it first came out. But the fact that it came out 2007 and they were essentially putting a lot of that in a movie in 2011 is interesting. Like, it's interesting. It's a quick turnaround, and it's very different from decades of superhero films that were pulling on stuff from the 40s, from the 50s and 60s, and that's kind of where they stopped.
Yeah, I agree. Because if Thor came out and was like, verily, and did all of that, fully shifting the tone into almost the Shakespearean style, I think it would have been even further afield than what they landed on in the movie.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I really appreciate it is going from like WandaVision being so close and loving that Kat Jennings part, then getting her, her origin story here in Thor, just magic. I mean, her comic timing in this movie and eye rolling is just absolutely beautiful.
I was surprised also, though, she's barely in it. What are her? She has like 4 lines, it feels like. In this
she
movie.
tases him like a champ.
Yeah, she did.
Oh, Pete, just anybody listening, Pete just died. He said
Yeah.
she tases him and then he just straight up died. It was
tased.
very sad.
Yeah.
It's a really good cast. I mean, this is another thing that I think Kenneth Branagh did really well is the large majority of the cast joined for him, not for Marvel stuff. They got relative unknowns in terms of Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth, who had done a lot of Australian
Idris
TV
Elba.
on one end. Well, but people like Idris Elba, people like Stellan Skarsgård, people like Anthony Hopkins, they all joined up because Kenneth Branagh was directing. And that really... totally get what you're saying in terms of they nail it with Thor Ragnarok, but I think that's probably at least partly on the casting directors, but I do think setting the tone for this part of the MCU can be credited to Kenneth Branagh. And again, I know I'm in the tag for the movie, but I think he does a really good job directing it. Like, it's a good looking movie as well.
There are some
you
like
love it.
really beautiful shots for sure, but then there's some shots where you're just going, can we just? What side are we? It's just a little all over the place.
What are you? Are you in film school, Pete? You're really bringing that heat.
Well,
talking
rewatching it, you're just kind of like, why is it?
Every Marvel movie's like all over. All the Iron Man stuff, he's flying all over the place. Falcon Winter Soldier was all dipsy doodle.
Well, there's characters that fly. That makes more sense.
I mean, I kind of get it though, because to me, it kind of represents that. I mean, we're like, there's that one, I think, really gorgeous shot when we're first heading into Asgard, and it's the underside of the world that looks like a mountain, and then it flips and you see it's like the underside. So it always gave me the sense that, like, we tend to think of like, it's all vertical or all, horizontal or whatever, like a world on top of a world on top of a world. But this always gave me the sense that the 9 realms were kind of, I mean, I know they're all on the tree, but they're all kind of different angles and they're all different places in the universe. And so I don't think I minded that much, but I don't think it takes me out of it. Like, you do note it if you pay attention to that stuff and you're giant film nerds, but it did take me out of it, I think.
Like Pete.
Like Pete,
Yeah.
clearly.
Huge.
I took
film Twitter.
I took an intro to film class, so
Oh, great.
Nice.
So
Recent, what,
you're
20 minutes
pretty-
ago? I mean, I agree. I like the way the world is built here. I think they do a great job. I mean,
Yeah.
so much.
I'd just like to say on the record, I like golden organs as much as the next person. I think they're beautiful upside down.
Organs.
Yeah, it looks like a giant church organ. The
Yeah,
Asgard,
he's not talking about organs inside of your body. He's talking
thought
about
you were
a pipe
talking about-
organ.
Yeah.
organ. Yeah. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say, I think the look of the movie is really well thought out. And to your point about Kenneth Branagh, like, he is meticulous. He's a meticulous director, and he wants to really, I feel like he really thinks about every aspect of the movie. It's just, I think he was making this movie for a tone that Marvel sort of slid right past as they were going on to the next one. Because I'm as a classically trained actor, you want to find a guy who's going to go to bat for a Shakespeare thing. This is it.
I mean, that's literally how he found Tom Hiddleston. He was, what was it? I don't remember what play it was, but Hiddleston was doing something on the West End because, you know, I mean, I think in his heart, like if Tom Hiddleston could be on the stage all the time, he would. But he found him doing, I don't remember what it.
One-man show of Loki.
Yeah, I think it was Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. Wasn't
it was. It wasn't Reeve Carney. It was actually Tom Hiddleston underneath that.
No, but you're right. He was doing a couple. He had done a couple of shows, I think, with Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah,
at that
and
point.
was like, "Do you want to do like I have this thing coming up? I'm thinking we're going to be like real Shakespearean with it. You should try out." Which is weird when you think back that he actually tried out for Thor because you're like, he's clearly like Loki, like just like so. Yeah, I always thought that was interesting, but even like where he found them from, he got people that had a few people that had plenty of stage experience.
Well, that's a good transition to talk about some almost casting stuff. So there were a lot of different things. Like you were mentioned, Tom Hiddleston auditioned for Thor, which very weird. Apparently he had to lose a lot of weight. They wanted to give him a hungry look, as Loki is eventually what they went for, versus Chris Hemsworth, who actually bulked up a lot for the part, of course, like most Marvel actors at this point. But Hemsworth was actually turned down at first. Like he tried out for it and he got turned away. The other folks that tried out, Liam Hemsworth, his brother, also tried out for it. Didn't get it, obviously.
But he was actually ahead of Chris Hemsworth at one point, wasn't he? Like they actually were like more into Liam Hemsworth, which
Hemsworth battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Third Hemsworth, nowhere in that conversation.
Oh man.
No. He signed a multi-year deal for Westworld. 20 years.
Poor guy. Also, Kevin McKidd from Rome, who actually would have been kind of great. I think he's really good. Triple H, the wrestler.
Oh, yeah.
Charlie Hunnam, which feels like kind of almost a 1-for-1, maybe a little less talent, not quite as funny. Alexander Skarsgård, which also maybe a little more Loki. Joel Kinnaman. Daniel Craig was actually offered the role. Like he was straight up offered the role of Thor, and he said, "No, I'm doing James Bond. I can't do that."
Okay, I mean, all right. Calm down, Daniel Craig.
It's better this way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on the other side of things, a couple of other ones. Charlie Cox, apparently, who played Daredevil, auditioned for Loki, which I didn't know until I was doing the research before this. And this is one I'm real glad didn't happen. Mel Gibson apparently was approached for Odin and said no thanks. Wow. So, hey, we dodged a bullet.
Oh, no. Here's a fun sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I would say fun sidebar about Charlie Cox auditioning for things, just real quick. One of my favorite anecdotes of his, and you guys might know this already, he auditioned for one of the Star Wars movies, but it was, and he never said what role, but it was when he was in the middle of shooting and like preparing and like it just in the middle of Daredevil. And he spent so much of his time being a blind man on the show that when he went into the audition, he was still in like Matt Murdock like blind mode, so like he wouldn't look anybody in the eye, like he just did not like he would like look off angle, he'd look at the floor a lot, he'd never meet people in the eye, he was always looking kind of like left of center because he was so used to doing that as Matt Murdock. And he realized when he walked out, because he is not in fact blind, he was like, I probably looked like it was just a disaster because I just looked like I just wouldn't look at anybody and I wouldn't like interact with anybody head on. And so it was it was not a great interview.
I like what he's doing. I think I'm going to take that.
Blind Jedi. Perfect.
For the movie.
Yeah. And then they used that later for Donnie Yen's character.
Yeah.
But yeah, that always made me laugh that Charlie Cox was just like too much Daredevil
in too deep
in his Star Wars.
That's so funny. Another one, which I can't believe. Yes, B. Sorry, yes, you were going to say something.
We were talking about casting, and I just wanted to throw in there Renee Russo, also really amazing choice.
Another one who's not really, she's great. She's not really in that movie. And if you go watch the deleted scenes, almost every single one of her scenes got deleted from the movie, which is wild. To be fair, they're not great or necessary scenes, nothing against her, but it's kind of a bummer. She doesn't get to do much. She gets to do a little more in Dark World, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah. Also unfortunately.
Dies.
Yeah.
They use her later and stuff, but underused for sure.
Some of the deleted scenes are interesting because there are a lot with Thor and Loki as well that build them up a little bit more as brothers rather than rivals. And it actually shows like the genuine love they have. And I get why they cut them, because it was already, I mean, it's not a long movie, but for the first Thor movie and Marvel still early on, like it's long enough. But it's interesting because it feels like taking those scenes out really changed the dynamic between the brothers pretty quickly. Where it would have been a little more sympathetic, I think, a little bit more of a tragedy. And this went pretty much right to Loki being like Loki, you know, real quickly into the movie.
Yeah, I feel like in the movie it's more about, is Loki good at being a villain or bad at it, as opposed to like, is he his brother's
thoughts about how the MCU's treated Loki, but we can talk about that later.
Oh wow.
No, let's do it.
Heavy breath. Yeah, let's get into it.
I want to hear it.
So I love him in the comics, and I think the MCU has done a real disservice to him. I think it's it's done a lot of this with a lot of its magic users, where it's nerfed almost all of them to start with, which, I mean, I understand, because like when you're first setting up the world, like you have like a witch who can literally rewrite, you know, reality with her chaos magic, and then you have like a dude with a shield. Like, come on, you know. So like, all due respect to Steve Rogers, but like, come on. So I can see why, but it's never, this is why I'm excited for the series coming out, because it's never really like, there was I can't remember what comic book it was, but Silver Surfer at one point mentioned like Loki's abilities. Like, he's so powerful, he could probably decimate, like destroy a planet. And I always think that the MCU, and he's also been a really, really good villain in the comics, in that a lot of times, like, he doesn't show his hand as like often, like he's not as obvious, and he doesn't need as much attention in the comics. And I feel like the MCU in a lot of ways has kind of not only nerfed his power, but also his manipulative abilities, and has kind of really turned him into this like almost like a bumbling like con man, where I feel like he just hasn't gotten his chance to shine. And it really feels like Marvel knew early on, like, oh, we fucked up, like this is the guy everybody really cares about, but we can't give him his own movie because we have a plan for the MCU and we can't give him his own movie. Shit. Like, and they kept bringing him back like he was supposed to die, and they brought him back and he was supposed to die, and now they're like, do you want a series? Because like, people care so much about you. And I still feel like it's almost the same problem with Winter Soldier. I feel like they never fully figured out how to use him. And it was kind of the same thing with Loki too, where I feel like they just don't give him the respect that he should have from who he is in the comics.
I feel like they're nervous about giving them more than one trick. Like, it feels like with Loki, it's like he can sort of be in multiple places and create doubles of himself, and a couple other little zipper zaps, but not much else, because then it's like, well, I think that confuses the way the big fights will play out if there's more power there. And when in the comics, I think we're like, well, of course he can do other things. There's this huge continuity backing it all up, and we sort of believe in that more. And movies are so contained, I think it's harder for them to deal with that.
I do think the other part of it, which we touched on a little bit earlier, is how they are setting up magic in the MCU with this movie, which we talked about this a little bit with WandaVision, but if you look back specifically at this movie, the conversation that Thor and Jane Foster have, the whole what you call magic, we call science conversation, and he's drawing the world tree and showing its different planets and all this stuff, which at the time I thought super clever. I remember coming out of the movie theater after seeing that, I'm thinking, oh, that's smart. They've figured out a way to make this work for general movie theater audiences, make it work with the Iron Man movies where it doesn't feel too far afield.
Well, and that's why you don't believe in science, right?
No, I'm anti-science. And then 10 years down...
No science.
No science. No thanks. And then 10 years down the road in WandaVision, you have like straight up witch battles happening in the past.
Yeah.
And that's fine because people have gotten used to it at this point. So to your point, Alisha, I think a part of it is that they, whether they're right or not, they felt like they had to set this up this way to make it relatively muted in terms of the magic, not overpower everybody, have everybody at this very even level. But I think to the benefit, now that audiences are all in the tank for the MCU, a decade later, it's okay. And they can like pull the lid off a little bit with all of this stuff.
Yeah, it really feels like MCU, like they're like, okay, we got through the Infinity Gauntlet arc. Now we're getting weird, like multiverse. We got weird, 100%. Like alternate realities. We got multiverses. Probably some of the other Spider-Mans are coming back, like Spider-Mans.
I think Spider-Man's is actually the correct use. Right?
Spider-Man's, they're coming back probably. Yeah, maybe Charlie Cox's Daredevil. Who knows?
I agree, and like the Loki series, like even if he is sort of depowered, which it may be, even it feels like it might be even more depowered based on what we've seen so far. The way everything else is driving toward that series, I think I'm super excited for that.
But
the trickery side, I think, will be high.
That's I wrote a piece about that a couple weeks or maybe a month or so ago about how it looks like they're finally going to get back to his like, hey, do we remember he's the god of mischief, like the trickster god? Because we all seem to keep forgetting that because he's really bad at tricking people. Yeah. Like he either just announces that he's the one behind the plan because he wants the attention, or it's like blatantly obvious that he's what he's trying to do, like the thing he's trying to pull. So I hope that all his grandstanding in the trailers and stuff is I hope that they're not setting it up for like a red herring where he still continues to be kind of bumbling, like his ego gets in the way of his planning.
I hear you. I also think it's a good problem to have, though, that Marvel has these things that they haven't quite explored yet. Like, I think that's a great opportunity for the Loki series to kind of get into what they're going to do and what they're going to not. And I hope they do, because otherwise, you're right, what a waste. But I do hope that, like, moving forward, when they listen to fans, and there's a ton of outcry for more Loki and more Winter Soldier stuff. So I think it's like if they are going to circle back around or whatever, they got some great opportunities, and hopefully they do that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure.
Just to throw it back to the movie, though, for a second, I do think there's some things that Tom Hiddleston does in the movie that are wonderful, like really, really well done, just in terms of delivery of lines and the way that he does things. The first ones that come to mind, I'm blanking on the exact line. I think it's the scene where he's confronting Odin about being a frost giant, and he just has this line where he sort of spits at him and goes, "Is it? Is it?" The way that he says that's so sharp and so specific. Love that moment. His whole relationship, even if a lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor, I think he and Chris Hemsworth have really good chemistry together.
Yeah.
And the scene where he goes in and lies to Thor and tells him that Odin is dead when he's wearing the suit in the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters is great. There's so many different emotions that are going on there. I love the little beat at the end where he tries to pick up Mjolnir and he can't and gets very frustrated about it. Just good stuff. You can see, even if, again, to your point, Alisha, that he's a little underdeveloped in the magic, you can see why people at the top of their crowd in particular just hooked into him absolutely immediately with this movie.
And,
I think
oh, go ahead.
We keep doing it. Go ahead. You go first this time.
I was going to say, as Kat says, meow meow, which I really appreciated her with everybody kind of saying the name in different ways a little bit. So I thought that was great. But yeah, I just think that like, I agree, and I completely forgot what I was going to say, so please.
Thanks for interrupting, Pete. Alisha?
You stuck with it.
You tell you're trying to get there, like maybe I'll remember, but it's when I get done with the sentence. Shit, it's not there.
The entire time we've been talking, Pete has been sitting here in his head going, meow, 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 meow.
Meow, meow, meow. I do that part.
And he finally got a chance to say it.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's the one scene that got me that really, I think, really indicates how duplicitous and manipulative he can be, and I thought it was really well done by him. And the way that it was written, kind of the way it was shot, is the scene right after Thor and Odin get in the fight because Thor wants to go for the frost giants and Odin rightfully says no, and then they're sitting on the stairs and Loki leans over and is just like, this is like the Loki is the snake in the ear, like that. I really appreciate. He's like, I think you are right, I think. And then so on the surface he can deny everything. He told Thor it was a bad idea to go.
Yeah.
He told Thor, like he didn't say anything about going to Jotunheim.
That's
all he said was he was just being supportive of Thor, but he never said so. Like, it was just the way that Tom Hiddleston plays that scene. He is every time, like every person you've ever known that has like played both sides of something, or like you'll go to a friend or that person will go to a friend or whatever and be like, oh yeah, I think this person, like they're in the wrong or whatever, and then you go to the other friend like in the middle of the fight and you're like, oh no, I think they were wrong. Like, I can totally see where you're coming from, and you're like, man, he's just, the way he plays that scene, it's so subtle but it's so good because you can see that there's a whole other like layer happening underneath it. And I think Branagh does a really good job of shooting that scene too, to kind of really play up the fact that, like, Thor, you fool, he's playing you right now, but he's just so. And I think Hemsworth does a good job of being that like super hot-headed, like, you know, it's really obvious how young they both are in this movie. It's so insane to look at both of them. They're so young.
Yeah, I agreed. That was the scene I was going to talk about, because he says to her,
"You're welcome."
Okay. Yeah, thank you. He says to Thor, meow, meow. Whatever you do, don't disobey him. You don't want to go and disobey him, do you? And it's just such a great way of, like, it's like these two assholes know how to poke me and get me fired up in the wrong direction. And it's that kind of classic brother knowing a little bit too much about the other to kind of get them worked up to make them do what you want. As someone who does get hot-headed and make horrible decisions, it was very cool the way they kind of, and like you said, shot that, played that, acted that. It was really cool.
But do you have any Lokis in your life, Pete, that you would consider the person who's winding you up?
The guy who currently looks just like Loki right now. That's you, guys.
He's more Tony Stark. He has the goatee. Yeah,
but that's part of my illusion, I guess.
It's his glamour.
Yeah.
But also the acting moment of when Loki was first kind of taking the throne, and it was shot like upside down first, and then kind of turned a little bit. So that was cool.
What is with you and the camera angles? Wait,
I know you. I'm telling you, this guy just took a master class with Martin Scorsese or something.
Hey, I got a bit. I'm gonna run with it. You know what I mean?
That's not a bit. That's not a bit. And the scene where the feint where it's Loki who zaps Laufey as he's about to kill Odin, I thought was just. It really is a Loki Thor duo movie, and because you really. There's great surprises throughout that pay off all the stuff that you guys are talking about.
Well, on the other end of the spectrum, talking about Chris Hemsworth as Thor, I do think he has chemistry with basically everybody. I know you're one of you.
He could have chemistry with a tree.
Exactly.
Like, Chris Hemsworth, like.
The camera loves this guy.
Yeah, I mean, even if Natalie Portman doesn't get a ton to do as Jane Foster, and she's not necessarily in the movie, they do have really good chemistry together, and she's somebody that. It was a bummer. That was the one thing that I really kind of missed in Thor Ragnarok and the further movies. I understand why she did not come back for them because she didn't need to, but she's great and they're great together. And this is very much jumping ahead, but I'm excited to see them together again. One little note about her that I thought was kind of neat that I didn't realize. So in the comics, Jane Foster is a doctor. She is paired up with Donald Blake, who's the human guise of Thor. He's also a doctor. In the movie, of course, she's a scientist, and this is something beyond the Kenneth Branagh of it all that really apparently drew her to the movie, and she worked with them pretty heavily on developing because she felt like this is a very unique, very different thing for a superhero movie to have somebody that can inspire particularly young girls who are going to come see the movie in STEM to potentially be scientists, see somebody who's a proactive scientist. And that's great. I'm glad she did that. That was kind of my whole point about it.
Yeah, that was always the crazy thing. And like even early on in the MCU is the casting, like not just in Thor, but all of the movies. Like Marvel has always, that's been it's not even a secret weapon. It's just their fundamental thing that everything builds on. The casting is like, I think the only maybe real misstep they've ever made was Finn Jones as Iron Fist. Maybe Terrence Howard as Rhodey, because like, come on, Don Cheadle, upgrade. But
controversial on this podcast.
Yeah, but like they just don't miss with casting.
And that is so hard in all of the movies they made to nail the casting. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, like they just don't miss. And now you have like you look at lineups, like their movie lineups, and it's like, is this an Oscar movie or is this a Marvel movie? Because it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, just to talk about Natalie Portman, what do you guys think about Jane Foster in the movie? Pete?
I mean, I thought it was, the classic meet cute with running somebody over with your van twice. I mean, she backs up over him the second time, which she was this hilarious.
I'll tell you what.
Like,
I'm in the tank
again.
for the movie. I laugh at that every time. It is a very well.
How are we
going to
find
take.
him? I don't know. I'm just going to back up this giant.
It's very funny
Jeep van thing that I have. And some of the Jeep van shots, by the way, like riding off into the sunset, it was great. I mean, you get a lot of great Jeep van fun, and it's good.
Yeah.
But were they Dutch angles?
Yeah. You love the wide shot they used on that?
This is getting a little away from Natalie Portman, but it just did remind me that one of the other things that I really like about the film, and I understand this is part of the fish out of water thing, but I love the fact that they immediately take the air out of Thor. Like the second he hits Earth, he gets hit by a car, taken to a hospital. They stick the needle in his butt. He gets hit by a car again.
I'm mighty Thor. Yeah,
it's immediate. Like it sets up exactly the place he's in and how far afield he is from where he was before. And I watched the movie again with my wife, and she was like, "This movie is dumb. Why does he become a completely different person in 24 hours?" And I was like, "Well, first of all, we're getting divorced. Second of all, this is it weird to announce that on the podcast?"
Well, you've told
but I was
her,
like,
or...
that's actually the thing that I really like about the movie, and I know I said this earlier, is how simple the arc is. That it's just he immediately gets knocked down 1 million pegs. Nothing goes right for him. He thinks his dad is dead. He can't get his hammer. He doesn't have any of his powers. He's like, all right, well, I guess I'll try being a good guy instead.
And he's committed to living on Earth and just like goofing around and falling in love with Natalie Portman, which is
literally,
nice.
He runs into a hot girl that tells him no once.
Yeah,
exactly.
Works every time.
And he's like, wow, maybe I'm not all the hot shit. I should rethink my life, my 1,000-year-long life. And he does. So basically, TLDR, Natalie Portman is magic.
Yeah.
Like basically.
Well, what you see as magic, we call science. So
yes,
he's basically
except they always refer to Loki's stuff as magic. They're like, but except for the wizard over there.
Yes.
He's basically making breakfast and then realizing he's been a piece of shit, and then like hands people over some eggs and was like, "Sorry, I'm now a new person." And sometimes it just takes.
Pete, if you got drunk with Stellan Skarsgård, wouldn't you be a new person in the morning?
Yeah. That was a great thing where they knock on the door and you think maybe it's who's it gonna be, and he's carrying them and he's completely wasted. It's just it's adorable. There's a lot of adorable fun moments with Thor, which is nice. That's what makes them, like he has these kind of like, oh, huge blonde guy, you don't mean so bad.
My goal is I want to slowly get all the Skarsgårds into the MCU. Just bring all of them in slowly.
That's your own personal Infinity Gauntlet, is all of the Skarsgårds.
Just collecting all the Skarsgårds, yes. My Pokemon deck.
I think though, like he's over puffed in the beginning. He's like, it's like a big whole thing, and then when they undercut it so hard, that's the bones of why Thor is such a comedy character in the back end of the rest of the movies. And I think it's great. That's why I think this movie does get credit, not as much as Alex old hard-eyed Alex over here is going to give it, but I do think it's all right there. They just need to blow it up, which they do a couple movies later.
Let me talk about the one part I don't think works about the movie.
This ought to be interesting.
The Warriors 3. I think they're kind of shoved in there. They don't quite work. They're sort of there just for that first action sequence on the Frost Giants planet, and that's pretty much it.
No, the second time when they go back down to save Thor.
Yeah, what do? Volstagg disappears.
A hilarious moment where he goes, "Found you!" And
that is fun. I like the actors. I know you like Ray Stevenson because he's also the Punisher. Was that confusing at all to you, Pete?
No, he had a beard on, so it made it clear.
Okay. I did like the joke of Xena, Jackie Chan, and Robin Hood. Was a pretty funny little bit, but otherwise, I agree with you, Alex. They don't do much. Sif, on the other hand, is awesome.
Yeah,
but
the whole
they
time.
also waste her because she's like the
100%.
only one that knows. Like from the beginning, the minute that's going back to the scene where Loki's sitting down on the step with Thor and he's whispering in his ear, Sif knows immediately. She's like, that motherfucker's doing
Fuck
something.
this guy.
I know he's doing something. I don't know what he's doing, but I know it's not good and I know it's gonna lead to bad things. And then that's kind of true to the comics and also Norse mythology, where she's the one that she never really trusts Loki. Like she kind of sees him from the beginning, and where the other ones are like, or with Fandral is like, he likes to play pranks, but
mischief, yeah.
And then they don't do anything with the Warriors 3, which it would be really cool to get. We're not going to, but it would be fun to get like a Disney Plus spin-off of them, like of that time where they were in across the Nine Realms trying to keep order between Thor and Thor Ragnarok, because Loki just let the Nine Realms go to absolute hell because he was busy just putting on a play about himself. So I want either a Disney spin-off of the Warriors 3 and Sif going across the Nine Realms, and also a mockumentary series of them putting on the play in Asgard.
Yeah,
with just like
that's very fun.
Yeah,
I mean, like you guys are saying, I think, not to armchair edit, Pete, that's a term you probably learned in your class, the movie, but I think you could have just had Sif there and it would have served the same purpose. It feels like they put in the Warriors 3 because they're in the comics and that's it. And I love them in the comics. And it's nothing against the actors who are totally fine, but Sif serves that purpose. They're also there.
A couple more people for Thor to sacrifice himself for was helpful, I guess. But yeah, I agree with you. And the play would have been called "Waiting for Odin's Son." Is that
yeah? I think so.
Waiting for Guffman. Is that
works? That works.
Yeah.
I'm into it. There is a really nice beat at the end. Like they don't really play the Sif Thor relationship as a romantic one necessarily throughout the movie, but there's that great beat at the end where she's standing with Frigga, Rene Russo, and talking about how he is just waiting and looking for Natalie Portman. And Jamie Alexander just has this very subtle, just sort of sad look on her face while it happens, and it tells you everything you need to know. And I really like that bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We're gonna start keeping track of times.
Too.
It's I think something with the Warriors 3 and with Sith, it feels like, and it kind of, I think I mentioned this before, is that it feels a little bit like in the early like MCU movies, maybe with this one, they try to adapt the comics almost a little too faithfully. Like, well, these characters we have to get in, this character we have to get in, as opposed to just like Taika Waititi is like, nah, everything you love about the comics, not doing any of that. Like we're doing our own thing, and it works. But I think it suffers a little bit too much from that because they tried to get all these characters in that they thought were important, but it's really a movie about Thor and Loki, and to some extent Jane Foster, and so it's like you have to, and that's a fair, like 3 people, that's a pretty fair, that's a lot to juggle on one movie that's not that long. So unfortunately, like you said, a lot of these characters, like even like Frigga and all the Warriors 3 and Sif and all the rest, they just don't really have much to do on screen. They make it work, the little bit they do have, but they just don't have a lot to do.
On the other hand, something that I do think they balance pretty well, certainly better than they do in Iron Man 2, that's not, the biggest feat in the world, is S.H.I.E.L.D. I think the way that S.H.I.E.L.D. is integrated in the movie actually works really nicely. Coulson works really nicely here as well. And it feels integral to the arcs of the characters in the movie versus Iron Man 2, where they just, like we were talking about on last week's podcast, just sort of pop up every once in a while and they're like, gotta go to the Southwest. See you later.
That's the fun thing about, we got to see what he was talking about in this movie, right? We got to see what was going down in New Mexico and what it was all. So that was it's a fun, nerdy payoff.
It's Coulson's story, you're saying, Pete.
Yeah, exactly. We're all just in Coulson's world, you know what I mean?
That they are seen as an outside antagonistic force, and we as the moviegoers, we as comic book fans know, no, S.H.I.E.L.D. is the good guys. They're the ones that we're rooting for. But the way that they make them work here, it's an interesting angle, and it works for the world, and it works for the burgeoning MCU, where you don't exactly know where they stand at this point.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Coulson actually says that, as he's taken, the scientist stuff, he's like, no, we're the good guys.
I have a controversial statement. I think Coulson and Nick Fury should be just Nick Fury. Nick Fury should be doing all of Coulson's stuff.
You take that back.
Yeah.
Coulson, I mean, or they're all like, it's just Coulson isn't Nick Fury, and you really want it to be Nick Fury.
Shut your whorish mouth. Phil Coulson is his own man.
I know, but here's the thing: he doesn't. We're not going to get him back. He's done, right? Are we going to get him back?
You don't know that.
No.
You don't know. Shh.
So
you don't know.
So Nick Fury gets to just walk into scenes at the end of the movie and say like one or two lines. Nick Fury should be the one in there who's doing that work.
Have you ever?
It's the same character. It's two characters occupying.
Yeah, exactly. The boss doesn't do everything. All right?
This is important work. This is important work, and it's
that's what
just...
Coulson's for, to go do the shit and then
Coulson
report
pretty
back
much
to
ran
Fury.
Shield for a while. Like after everything fell, like he's not
And
like a.
I'm not saying Coulson's doing a bad job
Fury
or something.
did a
He should be
ton of work
fired.
to get it where it is, and now let him.
I'm not trying to get your buddy fired from his corporate
It seems
job.
like
what I'm trying to say is it's
You're
strange.
like one of these assholes who shows up at a job like, we don't need this guy, this guy, or this guy. Get rid of them all.
Yeah.
Saved you $1,000. See you
just
later.
trying to downsize Shield. There's government cuts.
$1,000? How much do you think people get paid, Pete?
I don't know.
Doesn't know.
Right.
Film school. I'm just saying it's two characters occupying a similar role, and we don't need that.
See, I feel like they occupy a
you
different
don't walk
role.
into McDonald's and say, "Where the fuck is Ronald McDonald? Why isn't he on the fries?"
I do say that every time I walk in there because I'm sick of that clown being absent and letting his fries suffer because the food's not as good.
McDonald's fries are fantastic. Don't even
See,
say.
I feel like they occupy two different roles, though. Like Phil Coulson's the front-facing, like he's the public-facing interfacer. How many times can I say face in a sentence? He's the face-facing facer.
Face off.
But he kind of does all the public-facing stuff, where Nick Fury is the one that operates in the shadows. So if you think about it, Nick Fury is the Secret Avengers. He's Cap Secret Avengers, and Phil Coulson operates like Tony Stark's, above board Avengers, because you kind of need both in intelligence. And so, and
That's
also
fair.
Nick Fury's a bastard. So can you imagine him showing up to a scene like that and being like, shut your fucking mouth. Like, we're taking your stuff. We're leaving.
Yeah,
Where
exactly.
Coulson's like, really sorry. Here's a check. We're the good guys, with that little like Phil Coulson smirk on his face. And so you're like, I kind of want to punch this guy, but also I kind of don't. So
That's fair.
I can see why they don't send Nick Fury out on missions like that.
But I'm not saying that they could have modulated Nick Fury's character a little bit, but I do think that they did that dichotomy that you just laid out didn't amount to much at the end of the day. It just sort of went away. You know what I mean?
Well, the funny
You and I
thing
are a team
is,
who will fight you for Coulson, apparently. That's what we're learning.
I know.
the funny thing is that Sam Jackson actually thought he was in the movie. They apparently, when they announced Thor in the trades, he was part of the announcement, and so he called his agent. It was like, "Great, what are we doing? I'm getting paid." And they're like, "Oh no, you're not actually in the movie." And then he shows up. Yeah, and then he shows up in the after credits. But that's like we were talking about the last time. That's part of the pattern of that was filmed by the Avengers crew, not by the Thor crew. So technically, he's part of the Avengers.
Speaking of agents, do you think Idris Elba is still firing his agent from his role in the MCU?
Dude, what are you talking about?
So
he
wasted.
killed it in that role. That was awesome. His accent
He hated
was
it
cool.
though. He hated it, like because he was wasted. He was absolutely wasted.
It was amazing. Great character. He killed it. Like that whole scene where he's still trying to cut Loki's throat as he's freezing. Badass. Yeah.
At the end of the movie, I wanted him to say to Thor, "So if the bridge is broken, can I go be another character in this franchise, or what's the deal?"
Or
because I don't think you need me
Thor,
here.
You guys get this fixed, or
Or if he would have said to Thor, "Hey, if you just would have fucking listened to me from the beginning instead of blowing past me and not understand," like,
Well,
who
he
should
let them through. Heimdall let them through.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, because Heimdall said, Heimdall's like, what's his line? Nothing escapes my sight, and this got past me. So I would be very curious to know how this happened. And then it makes me laugh. They're like, how could this have happened? And Loki, master mage sorcerer, is just standing there like whistling and looking around, and that's that scene where the Warriors 3 and Sif are talking about it. There is was it Hogan that's like suddenly it clicks and he's like, oh yeah, the only way they could have snuck them in is it would have taken a master magic user, and there's 2 in the kingdom, so or at least that they show. So
they
I feel
immediately
like
accuse Odin first. Like that's their first move. It's like it's definitely Odin, and then they're
Odin's
like, wait, is
crazy.
there anybody else who could have done it?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe
Thor.
maybe.
Think,
Nah,
think,
probably
think.
not.
Half of Heimdall's lines are, I see all, but I missed this little thing here. Okay, well, just keep putting this sword in this little hole. Who would Idris Elba? Who should he be playing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Any
Good
throws?
question.
Buddy, he wants.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Like what?
That dude's phenomenal.
Spider-Man.
Yeah,
It's a-
Yeah.
I don't care. All the characters. I just.
I have one. I asked a question so that I could say my answer.
Okay, sorry.
I want to. What if
Matt, you're being a real Nick Fury here, just running everything yourself.
I'm being Coulson? I think.
Oh, you're being Coulson. Okay.
Bishop. I want to see the Bishop,
Ooh.
the sort of
I want Method Man to
mid-90s
be Bishop.
Idris Elba Bishop, where he comes from the future and is like, hey, shit's all fucked up. Let's fix this. And he's the catalyst and main character of an X-Men movie.
Well, while we're going X-Men, what about like Magneto or something like that?
Well, that'd
Yeah.
be amazing.
I mean, he could do anything.
He'd be a fun Mr. Fantastic too.
Ooh.
That's cool.
Ooh, nice.
That'd be a
all
very
of
different
that.
Mr. Fantastic, but it'd be honestly put him in anything. Pepper
Yeah.
Potts
Exactly.
reboot. It's fine. Like just
Very into that idea. Before we wrap up the Shield section, we should mention, of course, a huge debut here. Hawkeye shows up in
Yeah.
the movie.
mhm.
That's
So funny.
That's it. That's,
No.
he's in a cage. He's in
No,
a
but
basket.
that line where he's like, "I'm starting to root for him here," was
Yeah.
great. That was a cool, like,
It was a
he's
good
seeing
line.
everything.
It's,
Sure.
it's a
going
little
on.
hint of the fact that they were really going to start leaning into a little bit with the kind of Matt Fraction humor for Hawkeye's
Yeah.
character. So yeah, that was like just one line. You're like, oh, I like this guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's just
They're not going to
such
pay off
a-
until the upcoming series, I guess, because he is wildly self-serious for every other movie.
Except for like a couple of his lines in Age of Ultron, which were like the lines where he stole the show.
Oh my God.
Yes.
He's like, "Oh, I could just take him out. Nobody would notice."
Yeah.
Oh, that was so
I
fun.
have
stuff.
arrows. The city is flying.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by robots. The city is flying, and I have arrows. Nothing
Yeah.
makes sense. You know,
It's-
bow and arrows.
That thing is so funny, though, the Hawkeye cameo in there, because clearly they're doing it to set up his appearance in Avengers. They're trying to tie everything together the same way that they introduced Black Widow in Iron Man 2. But it's so clearly filmed at an entirely different time and maybe even an entirely different place and then inserted into the shots later. It's...
Oh,
it doesn't...
did you go to the same film school?
Yeah.
I've been watching it
Yeah.
while...
Wow.
The-
Welcome to the podcast, Alicia.
Yeah. Just roasted people. I love it.
I guess my point is that, like, I think they threw it in there to be like, oh shit, it's Hawkeye from the fans, but
Right.
it immediately is glaring and on the side and would have worked better if they had integrated into the movie in some way. Like, make Hawkeye part of the movie. Don't just have him show up or not.
He could
It-
show
it
up
really-
with Coulson and then really drive Justin crazy.
Yeah,
exactly.
Cut him.
I'm also
cut him.
here to help.
It looks like they literally put him in a construction lift in Atlanta and we're like, hey, climb up here. We're going to turn the lights off and shoot this real quick. None of it makes sense.
Basically
Hurry.
did. Like that's
Especially
what they
because-
did.
The line before it was like, "All right, somebody get a gun on him," and he goes and grabs a bow and arrow, and you're like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, quick arrow guy. Get in the most wobbly, difficult place for you to shoot an arrow from.
Before we start to wrap up here, any other scenes or
Well-
things that folks want to call out? Yes, Pete, what other angles did you notice?
Yeah. So, what's nice about watching this now is there's a fun amount of tension knowing who's Hydra. Like the fact, like we saw a couple. I'm like, oh shit, stand right next to Coulson. He's Hydra. Oh, like
Yeah.
there's a fun amount of tension going back and rewatching it now. Also just a lot more love for Kat and seeing all that she's been through, and also a lot of hopes that Jane and Thor can kind of work it out and get back together, because their meet cute was strong, and when he would kiss her hand,
Pete's theme.
gets you in
You
the
cute with a
feels.
strong Dutch angle. That's his. That's his.
You should see his romantic comedy. It's a short film. It's very hard to watch. It makes you seasick.
But Jane's OMG moment was just so much fun to see again.
Well, on that tip, I feel like when that hammer was finally flying toward Thor and Jane on the ground there, I was like, maybe she grabs it.
Yeah.
She grabs it this time.
Maybe maybe they refilmed the movie since the last time you saw it.
Yeah.
This is one of the things though, like you said, Pete, it's so much fun to go back and watch these early movies, knowing it's like knowing what you know now.
Yeah.
And like even knowing like you said, like, oh, he's Hydra, and then knowing how he dies, like, oh, and then like a couple years later, he's gonna be on the highway with Captain America and Falcon and Black Widow, and Winter Soldier's gonna fuck him up, just gonna rip the door off and pull him right out of the car, and that's the end of that. That's how he dies. Like, so it's just like, it's just really funny knowing, and it gives me a greater appreciation for Marvel, because they didn't know that they were gonna do all this stuff when they laid these pieces. Like they've admitted it before. Like there were a number of characters we're supposed to have like Phil Coulson, we're supposed to have like literally like one walk-on scene or like one movie, and then they ended up actually integrating it into the world, or they ended up bringing back these characters, and I think it's just done. It's a testament to Marvel that you don't really see the seams, that it doesn't feel like they like retroactively went back and like, we're going to try to shoehorn this character in because we need this, or because the fans wanted it. So but it is one of those movies that go back and look at the really, really early ones to see all these characters being kind of put into place. Like the first, introduction of Black Widow when she first comes in, she's Black Widow, like comic book characters or comic book readers do, but nobody else does. And you're like, ooh, this is going to be fun, so
Yeah.
It's just a really good time. And Thor does have a lot of those moments too.
And it's so hard from a production standpoint. It is so hard to be like, oh, let's make sure we get the same guy to do this then. And just like coordinating that it's a miracle. Like there are so many movies that fail to do that in their own movie, let alone doing it across all these movies. It's wild.
And I also want to get back to something Alisha talked about earlier and the Loki of it all. Like, you want to talk about a great villain that is kind of born in this movie that is underserved. Like, they talk about like, oh, it's just like a villain, it's just their perspective and what they're, makes them this thing. We see here, the dad is like, well, kids, one of you is going to be king. The other one's a piece of shit to me. Good luck. You know what I mean? So, like, of course, Loki's going to start being like, I feel different. I'm not the same. All of a sudden, years later, hey, son, I lied to you. That guy that we hate, yeah, I ripped you away from that family because, well, I get bored sometimes. I'm, kind of a big deal, and I live out in this mountain here in this Oregon that's golden, and it's pretty cool. I just think it's like you can really understand why Loki is the way that he is. Thor is so fucking annoying. Of course he's going to want to ruin his big day. You know what I mean?
There were times when like Loki's like, he's right. Thor's not fit to be king. Like he's a moron. Like look at him. Like
it's like the Homer Simpson of it. Like this is guy's in charge of a nuclear power plant. Are you insane? You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like
that's really
there
funny.
Is a fun kind of like thing that is really birthed here and played really well throughout, and it's you can really like. You can understand why somebody would kind of be that way, especially when it's like, you're not even my fucking dad. Like, I'm a frost giant. What are you talking about?
It does set up the later, like, what puts Loki on his redemption arc, too, because it does set up the fact that he's a little bit of a mama's boy.
Yeah.
Because, like, all the other Asgardians, like, they value fighting and valor and, like, swordplay. And Loki's the only magic user, and that's devalued, in their culture. And so he's definitely, like, more Frigga's son. Like Thor is more Odin's son and Loki is more Frigga's son, so it really sets up that close bond that he has with her in a very short amount of time. So I think it does a good job where later on then in Thor the Dark World, when you're like, oh, like, okay, he's not actually going to be Loki, he's going to actually like not try to betray Thor because he cares so much about avenging his mother's death that you buy it, you believe it.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you were talking about that son stuff, because Thor has this really bit where he was like, instead of saying Coulson, he was like son of Cole or whatever. That was a really funny just one-liner that was kind of lost there that I wanted to kind of
I have to say too that Clark Gregg, like having met him in person, like I've done like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. set bids and stuff before, that's basically him. Like he's very like nothing phases Coulson. Like he's like, okay, there's a literal god in front of me that's like saying completely ridiculous things. Okay, he just rolls with it and kind of has that little smile on his face. And that's kind of Clark Gregg, like in person. Like he's just very cerebral. He's very calm. He's very like, all right, you know. So
And all I'm saying is cut him
it's
from
just a
all the
fun
movies.
dynamic.
Boo! How dare you?
One other note that I wanted to mention, I love the end of this movie, like not the post-credit scene necessarily, but the actual end of the movie. Just that very simple idea of Thor standing there on the Bifrost, looking down, talking to Heimdall about Jane Foster.
girlfriend.
Jane Foster running around with, looking for the Einstein-Rosen bridge. And I think the last line is, "She searches for you," and he smiles, and that's it.
Yeah.
Every time I get like little goosebumps.
Yeah.
I love
there
it.
are some
It's
really
nice.
good individual moments, I think, in this movie too. Like, even like talking about the Rainbow Bridge, when Loki lets go, that is heartbreaking. Like when he realizes, that Odin will always choose Thor over him, and he just decides to let go. Like that is heartbreaking. I think. Like he plays that scene so well. And even like Anthony Hopkins does too, because you like all three of them do, because Chris Hemsworth is devastated. Like he still loves his brother no matter what. And Odin, you can tell that Odin, like in that moment, knows he's been a shitty father to Loki. Like he knows it, but he also is who he is and he can't change. Yeah. And so it's just that whole family dynamic is just really played out in that microcosmic moment there. And I just think it's done really well.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought up the Rainbow Bridge, because Mario Kart references are important, and I'm glad that Marvel knew that early.
Honestly, I wish the bridge was a little more like the Rainbow Road in Mario Kart.
But that's from that's actually from Norse mythology, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I was like, I'm
Peter's
pretty sure.
doing
I was like,
just like Mario
yeah.
Kart.
What did you think about the scene where Thor jumps up and he hits some bricks with his head and 10 coins come out? That was weird to me.
I can't believe that
weird part of Asgard.
Loki got him with a red shell. Real quick on the post credit, it's crazy how long they did post credits before they were like, let's just do them earlier, because it's a long time. And in this post credit, so much shit happens. Like if you didn't see this post credit, you'd be like, nothing makes sense going forward.
Just the Eric Selvig showing up, being taken over by Loki, which doesn't quite match up exactly with what happens in Avengers.
But the Tesseract, which is an Infinity Stone, which is a different color later and all that, like it's all just like, we'll just do this thing real quick and then see you later. Please come back and watch more movies.
Yeah.
And we do.
Yes.
And it works.
I'm glad we're talking about the credits, because the first thing we see is the Paramount logo, which goes into the Marvel flip.
It's weird.
And that is the comic book Marvel flip. And I really think like showing the live action and the Marvel flip is not as enjoyable as showing the comic book and honoring the material that we're pulling from. And so I wish they would go back to that.
Just so you know, we can just pull that from every other podcast when you've said it, and we can just lay it in, so you don't have to actually say it every time. We can just add it to the end.
Time.
Well, the thing about that, frankly, I mean, if you really want to get into it, the thing about going from the Marvel flip to the MCU characters is they got to a critical mass where they, frankly, didn't have to worry about the comics anymore. They had built their own mythology and their own fan base for the MCU movies that isn't necessarily separate from the comic book fan base, but there are people who just know the movies. That's all they've seen. Yeah. That's all they're into. They don't care about the comics at all. They know Robert Downey Jr. They know, why can I think of literally no other actors?
No, that's everybody. And Chris Evans. And we know from numbers that that's most of the movie viewers.
Yeah.
Is how they perceive this.
But why not still, pay homage to where it all came from, where it all started at the beginning of the movie? Give a little nod to the comics before we kind of go on this.
We know they're there. We're good.
You want to see like a movie about a book and have them just be like, look at all the pages here. Look, this movie was based on.
You have the earlier movies.
Novel.
I mean, most people probably know this, but just in terms of cameos in the movie, of course, you got Stan Lee as a truck driver. You do have JMS shows up as the truck driver who initially tries to pull out Mjolnir.
First one to touch the hammer.
First one to touch the hammer. You also got Walter Simonson shows up at the banquet at the end, which is great, and it's lovely that they worked him in. Yeah, there you go. So that's some cameos. Another couple of quick notes, just running through the stuff here that I jotted down. Apparently, at different times, Sam Raimi and Matthew Vaughn were in discussions to do a Thor movie. Also, Guillermo del Toro was very close to doing it before he decided to do The Hobbit instead.
I want Guillermo del Toro to do a Midnight Suns series or movie instead.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a great call.
That would be excellent. Also, Tyler Mane was in talks to do a UPN Thor series back in the 2000s around the X-Men times.
Yeah.
UPN, known for their fantastic dedication to quality.
Absolutely. This is one...
And their Dutch angles.
100%.
I can't believe how contested this role is, but Fandral apparently went through a bunch of different iterations. They originally offered it to Zachary Levi, who ends up playing it in Thor: The Dark World and beyond, but he couldn't do it because of conflicts. They talked about maybe bringing in Dominic Cooper, who of course shows up later in Captain America, and they eventually cast Stuart Townsend, who left days before filming over some sort of personal conflicts he had with the creative direction of the movie, and then they very quickly threw Josh Dallas
Fandral,
in
big
there.
part of the movie.
That's wild.
Well, but that was when he was coming off no, that wasn't even after. That was well after Queen of the Damned.
Yeah.
So I can see why Stuart Townsend doesn't work much.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's also, folks certainly know about this because it shows up in Thor Ragnarok later, but the Infinity Gauntlet kind of shows up in Odin's vault, as well as a bunch of other Marvel relics. And then later on, it turns out to be retconned, to be faked. The last thing that I want to mention before we move on, just because I wrote this down in a note, and it strikes me every time I watch this, the score on this movie is really good. Patrick Doyle's score, I really like the themes of the Marvel Universe albums. I think I've listened to Thor probably the most, Captain America maybe a close second, but it's very good. It's a good soundtrack.
I think I probably would listen to Winter Soldier the most.
Yeah, I'll check that out. All right, let's move on to our vision board.
I must.
I'll listen to more Marvel stuff, I guess, the thing that I do every day, all day anyway. Vision board, where we talk about things coming forward. We've already touched a lot on both of these, but the big two things that are coming out. First one, Loki is premiering June 9th on Disney+. There's 6 episodes. Owen Wilson is in it as Agent Mobius, and Mobius. Gugu Mbatha Raw is Ravonna Lexus Renslayer. It was created by Michael Walden, who worked on Rick and Morty, as well as forthcoming Heels with Pete, your boy Stephen Amell. That's coming soon to stars. It's a wrestling thing. And Doctor Strange 2 as well. So certainly Marvel seems to be in the tank for him. What, other than the things we touched on, what are you looking forward to with the show? What do you want to see? What do you think after WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier in particular is riding on it, if anything? Alicia, thoughts?
I think this is going to be as important about setting up the multiverse and timelines and stuff. Like, I think, again, like we kind of talked about how they played it safe for, like, early on when they were kind of establishing, getting people on board with the idea of like an interconnected universe. Now they can just get weird. And I mean, the other day, what was it, the showrunner said that it's partly inspired by Teletubbies. Like, there's like Miss Minutes, like the cartoon clock. It's also inspired by Blade Runner. Like, it's just going to be weird. Like, I'm really hoping it will be as weird as WandaVision was, because I think now that Marvel's earned enough goodwill, that can get really creative like that. So I think that with Loki, it has the potential to blow the doors wide open on the MCU in terms of truly just doing anything, like just the weirdest stuff they can think of, like any sort of tone, any sort of world. And if they pull it off, then I think it really sets up a lot of that potential to open that door in Marvel. And also it sets up Kang the Conqueror, like 110%. Loki's going to be the reason why Kang the Conqueror with Ravenna, and like, absolutely, he's going to be the reason why Kang shows up in Ant-Man and Quantumania, because Loki's been messing with the timelines.
I love that.
That's great. Yeah.
I
was just...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, striking a middle tone between WandaVision and Falcon Winter Soldier, where it's like...
It's not middle tone, it's Middleston.
Oh, it's Middleston. Great. Thank you.
Nice.
I think something that's right in between, where we get the fun of, like, these characters that are, like, down to earth, talking to each other and moving through things, and have the world be super weird and the things that happen be super weird, I think is what I want to see for this.
Pete, what about you? What's your big ask? What's on your vision board for Loki at this point?
Well, I'm just pumped because, again, the casting looks ridiculous. the thing up on her YouTube thing, the clip of Owen Wilson going back and forth with Loki is really awesome. That is, being able to roll with Loki like that was, I thought, really impressive. So I'm very, very excited about this Loki series. People want more Loki. We're getting it. Now all they got to do is deliver. So I'm very excited. It'll be interesting to see on what kind of Loki we're going to get and how deep they're going to kind of go into his powers. And
well, on that note, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the thing that I think is really interesting about this character arc, which I think based on promos is going to be immediately obvious to people, but this is the Loki after Avengers Endgame, but what that actually means is this is the Loki immediately after Avengers. So we got
This
Thor.
is pre-redemption.
Yeah, exactly. This is Thor and then Avengers, not even Thor the Dark World. He hasn't experienced any of that yet or anything like that. So he's still very much the bad guy. And that's going to be fun to see. Is he going to go on a redemption arc? Is he going to get worse in some way? That will be super fun. On the cameo bend, Alisha, you mentioned you think that Kang is going to show up, played. I don't know if he's
I don't know if he'll show up, but I
Okay.
think it's going to set up his story.
All right.
Yeah.
They didn't confirm Jonathan Majors is playing him.
Yeah.
It would be amazing if he was, but it's like one of those things like he's not playing Kang, wink, wink. And we're like, okay, but who else could he be playing? Wink, wink, So it feels very much like one of those, no, Benedict Cumberbatch isn't playing Khan. No.
Yeah.
But on that note, do you think, given that we're going through the multiverse, are we going to see other cameos? There's certainly been shots in the trailer of potentially somebody with red hair that seems to be dressed like a sort of Black Widow type.
Yeah, there are three. Some people I don't think it's going to be her. Some people think it will, but I'm like, that feels like it would really undermine her movie. But I mean, because it was supposed to come out before her movie's supposed to come out before Loki. So to me, that feels weird. So unless they added that scene in later, it would feel to me like initially when it was supposed to be released, it feels like it would maybe undermine like the impact of her movie to see her and her death in Endgame.
Yeah.
Some people think, some people think it's sorry. Some people think it's going to be Lady Loki that he's with. I was hoping for Verity Willis, but we'll see. Because it feels like they're borrowing a little bit from Agent of Asgard with this. And then the TVA is taking the place of like the All Mother, and Loki's doing missions for the TVA to clear his name. Then in the Agent of Asgard arc, where he does missions for the All Mother to wipe like a sin off the celestial record books.
I like that theory. That's good.
Yeah, it's great.
What about Thor though? Thor, obviously, as we've been talking about the entire podcast, very tied to Loki. Is he going to show up in the series in any form? No.
Maybe in like a flashback, but I don't think so. I think that Marvel knows that would maybe undermine it a little bit, because he's always been undermined in like how to play second fiddle with Chris Hemsworth, and I feel like putting Chris Hemsworth in it, like it's the same reason they decided not to put Benedict Cumberbatch in WandaVision, because he was supposed to show up. And then they were like, yeah, no, that'll completely undermine like her agency, that it's her story, her arc. It's going to all become about that. And I think that's one of the small ways that Marvel has kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit, because they've set up all these fun reveals and Easter eggs and expectations and cameos that they've almost made it so that when somebody does show up, it like the conversation becomes about that and not about the actual movie or show.
Yeah.
I think they're trying hard not to do that.
I think it's crazy to expect that, but I do think we will get Al Pacino as Mephisto here. For sure.
Oh wow,
that's what become a running joke. And Mephisto's just around the corner, and every single aspect, he's just around the corner.
It's gonna happen.
So close. I can smell the brimstone.
Although, here's something fun. So Ethan Hawke was cast in Moon Knight. I'm like, he would be a great Mephisto.
Oh yeah,
that's cool. He's got the hair.
This has nothing to do with Thor.
Like, kind of like craggy
my
face.
theory is that he's Khonshu, or however you pronounce that, the moon god.
That would be that'd be tough to cast a white guy as an ancient Egyptian deity, though.
Sure.
Like, I don't know if Marvel has made some missteps. I don't know if they're like, that's like phase 1 Marvel. Like, so I think
he does have a very white skull though. Like he has a bird skull. So no,
you're saying just a voice?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Let's move on, though, and talk about Thor Love and Thunder, which we touched on earlier as well. It's coming out May 6th, 2022. This is reuniting pretty much the whole Thor Ragnarok team, behind the scenes and in front of the camera, as well as picking up at the end of Endgame. So the Guardians of the Galaxy are going to show up apparently very extensively throughout the movie. Also, Christian Bale is the villain. He is Gore the God Butcher. Apparently, Russell Crowe is going to show up in a cameo or maybe a slightly larger part, unclear, as Zeus. Maybe Christian Bale's just going to straight up kill him. We're not sure. And Sif is actually returning. Jamie Alexander is apparently returning for this movie, as well as we mentioned earlier, Natalie Portman is going to be picking up the hammer and becoming Thor herself, straight out of the Mighty Thor arc by Jason Aaron.
So unbelievable.
Very excited for this.
Yeah.
Pete, since you are so stoked, what is on your vision board for this movie?
I want, first off, I hope it's hysterical, but I also really want it to be a love story.
With Dutch angles.
Yeah. Thank you for taking that for me. And yeah, I just think that it's going to be interesting to see kind of the passing of the torch, because the comic was very emotional. I cried a ton.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really nervously excited about how they're going to handle that. But man, they've got a great team in place, and there's a lot of amazing actors on board. So I cannot wait to go see that.
Moving into Jason Aaron Thor ideas, so excited for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just like big, I don't know if we're going to get like sort of the different timelines, like getting some King Thor and that sort of dark side of it. I feel like would counterpoint really nicely to all the like fun Thor stuff we've had for the last few movies. So I would love to see all of that.
Will Throg in there?
Oh, that would be great. I would love that so much. Alisha, What about you? What are you most looking forward to with Thor Love and Thunder at this point?
See, I hope it's a ton of fun. I think my ask would probably be a little bit like Pete's. I loved Ragnarok. I thought it was a fantastic movie. I thought it was a Thor movie. It was not that great. And I think because I love Taika Waititi, but he is a pure comedian, and at least in that movie. And so some of the more emotional beats were really undercut by because there was a joke like a second later, like the one of the ones was the get help scene, where they have that really emotional moment where Thor's like, you know what, you're right, Loki, maybe we should go separate ways. And like the look on Loki's face at that moment, you can tell that he's really wounded by that. Like he doesn't like, because Thor has finally given up on him. And you can see that Loki's just really wounded to the bone. And then they like undermine that with like get help 2 seconds later. So I'm hoping that with this movie, it's as much fun as the first one, but that Taika fights his instincts a little bit, his natural instincts as a director, to let jokes go on a little bit too long, and instead kind of lets some of those more emotional beats play out a little longer, just so they don't get as undermined. And I know that's a really specific thing. I just think that he's done a Thor movie now. He can maybe balance that like big comedy and action sequences with some of the really heartfelt stuff too.
Yeah.
That's great.
Cool. Coming out next year. Very much looking forward to that. Last thing probably on the vision board we should talk about is what's next for Darcy, which is very exciting. She is getting married to Andrew WK. That was a big surprise this week.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that threw me for a loop. Pete, I know you're all into Kat Dennings. Very excited for her though, right?
Yeah, he came on our show one time and was the coolest. So
he's the coolest guy. He's great.
I'm super happy for both of them, and I hope she continues to just be her amazing self in movies.
So
when he did the show, he brought his own comic book he made in high school, if I remember correctly.
That's awesome. That's really
cool. That was so funny. It was like pencil drawn.
So much fun, yeah.
Yeah.
He seems like just a really like it was like weird. Like I was like, I had no idea. Then I'm like, but also that weirdly makes so much sense.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm.
He's a cool dude.
Yeah. So what's on your vision board for their wedding? I'm kidding. I don't know. I don't actually want to talk about. Yeah, great music. There you go.
It's going to be a good party, I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, Alisha, what would you like to plug, if anything? Where should people check you out?
You guys can catch me on Screenrant, on Atom Tickets, but mostly you can find me yelling on Twitter, as you well know. I'm on there probably too much, so you can find me at Alisha Grauso, and that's a weird name, so I'll spell it Alisha Grauso.
Awesome. Alisha, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you
it was
about
great.
what we all agreed was the best Marvel movie. If you'd like to support
us sum up.
A little bit of retconning there. So
little
I
bit,
feel
yeah, a
like
little
I feel like we retconned the continuity there.
Honestly, the fisheye lens was the part that I had a real problem with.
Ooh. If you'd like to support our podcast, patreon.com/Comic Book Club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Crowdcast and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about Marvel movies. iTunes, Android, Spotify, Stitcher, or the app of your choice to subscribe, listen, and follow the show. At Marvel Vision Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. ComicBookClubLive.com for this podcast and more. Until next time, stay marvelous.
Gets me every time.
Yeah, I forget about it.
Gotta find a new sign-off. I'm sorry.
It seems like you're gonna have a different one, and then
Yeah,
it is.
I
the
know,
same.
and then I panic right before it happens.
But you still do a little accent. You put a little flavor on it.
Stay marvelous.
Say marvelous.
It's very like mid-Atlantic, like mid-century, like old-timey
That's what I'm going for.
kind of radio. Yeah.
Sums him up
Nailed it.
perfectly.
And hear the top hat.